Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are going back to the MMORPG article to talk about the Italian naval ships which were on offer for us in the article. But before I do that, we do have some quick announcements. The first thing is that on the Tech Hub Discord, we're going to be slightly changing how certain things work, so make sure to tune into the Discord on the weekend so you can understand how everything is going to work over there over the Christmas period and after. On top of this as well, we have created a new squadron. That new squadron is called Class 2, and Class 2 is going to be very similar to the Class Squadron. So if you have or need any information on it, please contact Matrix, who is one of the admins, over onto the Tech Hub Discord. When World War Mode comes around again, techies will probably be recruiting, and Tech WS is also doing well, and so is Class, which is why Class 2 has been created. To be able to create, more room for you guys to come and enjoy War Thunder together. So if you have or need any more information on that, please go to the Tech Hub Discord and hit up Matrix. And also, if you're already there, I hope you enjoyed the Discord. We're going to be doing giveaways every day over December to basically give back to you guys and all of the support that you've given us over this period of time. So let's get back to the Italian stuff. The first thing is there were two vehicles which were talked about in this piece. You've got the Saetta, and you also have the vehicle that you see before you, which is, of course, the Trento Class. Now, the Trento, which I believe it's just named as, is part of the Trento Class set of cruisers, and there is two of them. You've got the Trento and the Trieste, and I know a lot of people in the IKV video got annoyed at how I pronounce things. I pronounce things just the easiest way I can with my accent, otherwise, it makes everything a lot harder. If I need some help with translating some stuff, I do have people I can hit up, so maybe that can improve going forward. But the main thrust of this video is talking about how could we have noticed that the Italians were going to come into the game pretty soon. Well, the first thing to understand is during Fleet CBT, there was a lot of Italian vehicles that were on offer to actually play and to actually go through. This was actually pre-CBT, I suppose you would call it, and this one first is the MS74 Series 2A torpedo boat, and of course it was made in Italy. You can see that this looks very similar to a rank 2 machine that we could definitely see in game, kind of similar to the S class of machines that the Germans have, with a little bit of extra firepower on the booty. Torpedo boat, of course. Then you have other offerings, such as this one. This is, of course, the Soldati class destroyer. This is the most produced destroyer when it comes to the Italian Navy of World War II. Only had 4 120mm on it, but the main thing to understand is that this machine pretty much sold us on the idea of Italy. And then when light cruisers were announced as a thing, they brought in the first light cruisers in War Thunder, which was the Bartolomeo Colleoni. So it was very obvious that Italy was going to come to the game at some point. I thought that it was personally going to be a nation which came in when OBT started, but obviously that never happened, which is why I never commented on it. So you have all of these ideas already showing that they have at least 3 ships available. Then on top of this, we have the 2 ships which are talked about in this article, which of course are the Trento that you see here, and of course the Saetta, which you see here. So therefore we already have 5 ships. Looking at it from that point of view, and also how they discussed it in the article, there is definitely going to be the Italian Navy in 2020, which is wonderful to hear. And it's going to be a mix of World War II stuff and modern stuff, which, in my opinion, is just wonderful. So we're going to talk about the 2 vehicles and the history of them when it comes to the game and also in general. And unfortunately, the Saetta that you see in front of you doesn't have a crazy history, but the other one definitely does. So the Saeta that you see here is an interesting machine in some areas. It's part of the Freccia or the Freccia class of motorboats, and it's a 1960s machine which is very much designed after the Lampo class. Now the Lampo class, which you can see here, was a Lampo actually means lightning, I believe, and it was formed in the end of the 50s and the early 60s, and it was going to basically be a fast attacking coastal units machine, so an FAC machine. And the FAC machines were pretty much these machines that could go in and out of sections, so they would be able to do rapid offensive attacks, and they would just go in with cannons, machine guns, torpedoes, also anti-ship missiles, stuff like that, and be able to protect areas such as coastal areas or patrol areas, or maybe even deal with stuff like submarines or corvettes. They were fast action machines. That was basically what they were designed to do. Get in there quickly and deal with a situation when they had to. So that was the start of the Freccia class. It was the Lampo class or the Lightning class. And one thing I do want to mention before we go forward, Italy, you're nearly as bad as Britain when it comes to naming stuff. When you look up stuff like the Lampo or the Freccia, or even stuff such as the Saeta, you get multiple hits for different ships, right? And this is just infuriating. It's exactly the same as the British, where for some reason, instead of just coming up with new names, recycled names were used. And it is just a pain in the ass when it comes to trying to work out what information is going forward. So also, talking about the history of this machine that you see before you, it didn't really have a notable one, apart from the fact that it was, after the Lampo class. It was supposed to be an evolution of it, which gave it a little bit more engine power. They actually changed the engine to one Bristol Siddeley Proteus gas turbine and then two Fiat diesels. So it did have different engines with two diesels and a gas turbine. Then on top of that, it also had the RTN 150 radar, which was changed over time depending on what it required. One thing that I will say is incredibly impressive about the Saeta is that it had a lot of flexibility. So depending on what you needed to do, you could actually easily change it up. So it would only take a few hours to change the configuration of this machine, meaning the armaments that it held. So obviously the engines and stuff, they stayed the same. It was incredibly fast. It had a max speed of 40 knots, which is very impressive. And even though there was only two of them built in the form of the Arrow and the Saeta, there was supposed to be 4 overall, but they only built 2. The flexibility factor is insane. So in its motor gunboat configuration, you're looking at a machine which would have 3 single 40mm guns. And these 40mm guns are very similar to the Bofors guns that you had. They had 270 rounds per minute fire rate, and also a gyroscopic general tappet column with an optical or radar guided. So it's just insane. So you would either have 3 single 40s or 2 single 40s on a rocket launcher, which was 105mm. In the torpedo boat configuration, you would have a single 40 with 4 torpedo tubes in the central stern area. So basically the area that you see here, hopefully I'm showing my mouse, I might not be, but you know where I mean, the center of the machine. Then you have a motor gunboat and torpedo set, so you'd have 2 single 40s and 2 torpedo tubes. Then an anti-submarine set, so you would have 2 single 40s plus 2 sets of depth charge launchers, and then the mine layer, which would be a single 40, and then you would be able to set about 8 to 14 mines on it. So for me, the fact that you could take the Saeta that you see here, and you could technically have 4 versions of this machine, especially once mines are added into the game, is insane. It's really cool, and that is hopefully something that, you know, we can see going forward. Looking at the configuration that we see here, my guess would be that this is the configuration for either the torpedo boat or the, sorry, not the torpedo boat, either the motor gunboat or the motor gunboat torpedo boat, where it has obviously the two 40mm on top of it, and either the torpedo tubes or rocket launchers, depending on what these are. They could also be the launchers that we talked about before for the depth charges, but whatever happens, it's got two 40s on it. So therefore, you have very similar firepower to other machines in the game, which are incredibly powerful, such as the Brave class. If you've never played the Brave class, I highly recommend it. So where does this fit in War Thunder, and how did we already know it was happening before this news article? Because everything always has an interesting, period where it's kind of known about, but it also doesn't really get talked about. So if you go back to 2018, June, you will find this video. War Thunder Fleet CBT trailer, and at the 7-second mark you see a machine. You see the Saeta. So we already knew about this over a year ago. Now I believe I talked about it at the time. You can see it if I just roll through. It's right here. So it's only there for like half a second, but it's still there, you know, and I didn't see a ton of people talking about it, maybe because they were enthralled by the other parts of the CBT trailer, but the thing is, you can see this machine. It's right here, and it's all ready. So this idea that, you know, this was the only available image, well, why have you already had it where it's already in the video, you know, and it's already done up? And this also goes to the fact that a lot of people believe, and obviously this stuff is completely false, that, you know, Gaijin works on an update-by-update basis, where, you know, they have the stuff ready for said update, and then what happens is, you know, they have stuff ready for said update, and then what happens is, you know, they put it out there, and if it's not ready, then, you know, it won't be put in, and if it is ready, then it will be put in. This has been ready, this machine, for how long? At least a year. And then on top of this, if we look at when these were talked about, we're talking about 2017. This is 2 years ago at this point. All of these machines were talked about, apart from this light cruiser, which was last year. So these two were from 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And they're still not in the game. And they're fully fledged. They're fully ready to go. It's insane, the amount of planning and, you know, forethought that's when it comes to War Thunder there is, instead of just throwing everything out, you know, in the same update. So yeah, we knew it was coming a year ago. Just now, it is nice to have it confirmed that it is coming. I wish it had a little bit of better history behind it. It didn't really do anything in the 60s. There probably wasn't a lot to do. And since there was only 2 of them made, it didn't really have a big impact. One thing to discuss, though, is something that always will be on people's lips. I believe this is it when it has its rocket configuration, but it is very hard to tell when it comes to the pixels that are there, because you can see that it's not the easiest. But there is a caption to it, which is, "This is the Saeta in 1970 with SSMs on board." And it had 5 Sea Killer Mark I SSMs. So if you don't know what SSMs are, they're ship-to-ship missiles, which are incredibly deadly. If we're you know, if we're going to talk about it, or instead of ship-to-ship, probably a better translation, just to be overall, would be surface-to-surface missile. So therefore, you know, they are taking off from the surface, and they're going to hit something on the surface. So it's holding onto it 5 surface-to-surface missiles, and only had access to 2 40mm. So this could definitely be a configuration that we see in the game. This was tested, it was trialed, presumably until the mid-70s when the program was stopped. There is also a picture of the Freccia when it is around in 1974, where it has access to the 3 40mm, so we do have it in all of its forms, which is lovely. So moving on to the next machine, which is of course the Trento. Now the Trento has a little bit more of an interesting history, if we're honest, compared to the Freccia Class. The Trento Class cruiser was the first set of heavy cruisers that the Italians made. They were created in the late 1920s. They were built between 1925 and 1929. The Trento, which was the first of the Trento class, was launched in 1927 and completed in 1929, where the Trieste, or the Trieste, was launched in 1926 and completed in 1928. These were the 2 ships of the Trento class. There was no more, no less of them. And both of them, the reason why they are so important is even though they are the first heavy cruisers that were ever designed and ever created for Italy, which obviously puts their importance incredibly high, they were also named after the redeemed cities that Italy took from the Austro-Hungarian Empire after the victory in World War II. So therefore they have really big historical significance to Italy and should be put into the game for this fact. Also because they were the first heavy cruisers that Italy had, they definitely have some downsides to them, which would mean that they aren't as powerful as maybe, other heavy cruisers that were about. So the fact that these were, completed at the end of 1920, one of the facts of, life which happened back then was the fact that the Washington Naval Treaty existed. Now, the Washington Naval Treaty was a treaty that was signed by many nations, and it was pretty much a way to try and normalize what we would see from specific nations when it came to shipbuilding and other stuff. Basically, limits that you could put on machines instead of just growing out of control. And Italy actually signed up to the Washington Naval Treaty and said they would abide by it. And then they built the Trento Class, which exceeded the displacement limits of the treaty. So they pretty much just broke it with this machine. The armament, though, makes it a heavy cruiser. It has 8 203mm on it, so sets of jewels as well. So you can see 2 on the front and 2 on the back. But unlike other heavy cruisers, it's also nice to see that it was able to keep some of the aspects of stuff like destroyers and light cruisers that we see from before, such as the fact that it had 4 sets of dual-mounted 533mm torpedoes, so therefore it kept, them, which is really nice to see. On top of this as well, it had access to 8 sets of dual-mounted 100mm guns, 4 sets of single-mounted 40mm, which eventually turned into dual-mounted 37s, and then depending on if it's the Trento and the Trieste had 8 20mm AA guns, whereas the Trento only had 4, and then there was 4 dual sets of 13.2mm. So you can see slightly lacking in the AA department, but when it comes to the big guns, very, very impressive. But the biggest difference between this and other heavy cruisers, especially when you compare it to, let's say, something like a Hipper, is the Hipper had a ridiculous amount of armor on it compared to other machines that we see in War Thunder. This Trento class only has a 70mm thick armored belt, so it's actually not very strong at all when it comes to being able to take hits. You could easily probably HE this thing with a lot of machines on board. It also was able to hit 35 knots or 66 kilometers per hour, but in service that was dropped to 31 knots or 57 kilometers an hour. So it's still a fast ship, but the fact that it doesn't have a lot of armor on it means it's going to have to heavily rely on its guns in game and also its maneuverability and maybe even its torpedoes. The Trento class, because of the fact that it has this amazing history, it also was used during World War II, of course. Now, unfortunately, both of the Trento class cruisers did not survive the war. The Trento itself was torpedoed and sunk by a British torpedo bomber. It was actually sunk by a bow fighter, and then it was torped by a submarine in June of 1942. So it was first hit by a bow fighter. Of all things, a Bristol bow fighter hit this machine, and then the HMS Umbra finally finished off the Trento after torpedoing it. Then, after that, the Trieste, which actually survived longer than the Trento itself, it unfortunately was moved to La Maddalena in Sardinia, and she was later sunk by heavy bombers on the 10th of April 1943. So the Trento sunk by the British, and the Trieste was sunk by the Americans. And the Trieste at least has a more interesting story after the war, but we'll talk about, other stuff as well. So both of these were used in the interwar period as flagships, divisional flagships, mainly for the cruiser division. And then on top of this as well, the Trento class cruisers were used just in the Mediterranean in World War II, mainly to support the cargo efforts that Italy had moving between the corridor, trying to get supplies to the forces which were fighting in areas such as North Africa. And even after the war, even though both of them had been sunk, the Trieste, the superstructure, after being bombed, was cut away, and then she was refloated and towed to La Spezia. An inspection found that fuel oil had leaked into the machinery spaces which protected them while the ship had been submerged. And then the Spanish Navy actually purchased the hull in 1952. They wanted to create a light aircraft carrier out of it, but they never completed it, mainly because it was too expensive. So it's just got a really weird and interesting history behind it, which is really lovely to see. So overall, when we look at the Trento and when we look at the Trieste, which is the ship in this picture here, and this, I believe, is the Trento, I am very much looking forward to these machines. And overall, I'm looking forward to the Italian Navy. They have a lot of really fun and really interesting Rank 1 and Rank 2 machines designed in the World War II era and also designed in more modern eras such as the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And when it comes to destroyers like cruisers and heavy cruisers, they should also have a lot to offer as well. The Italian Navy was strong in World War II. It was hampered by certain decisions that were made, but if we look at their air and their ground and their navy, I think it is safe to say that their naval aspect was a hell of a lot more impressive than their other two aspects. Another thing I also want to mention at the end of this video, after looking at these 5 machines, there is a monster on the horizon when Italy gets added. Something that we mentioned with the Saetta is that it could carry some surface-to-surface missiles, mainly anti-ship missiles. But one thing that may give you nightmares is this. This is a hydrofoil, which has the automatics gun with anti-ship missiles on it. You thought the PGO-2 was bad. Italy's gonna come knocking. It's gonna be awful. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.